Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar. Today's presentation is titled Reduction in Force, Layoff Information for New York State Executive Branch Employees. My name is Nisha Stillwell-Frankson, and I am the Labor Education Specialist out of the CSEA Education and Training Department, and I will be your host for today's session. Our presenter today is Don Kelly, Deputy Director of Contract Administration Research. Don has been employed with CSEA for over 39 years. He has been Deputy Director of Labor Relations Research Division since 1992. He received his bachelor's degree from the College of St. Rose in Albany. He is a member of the New York State AFL-CIO Public Employees Pension Task Force. He has been involved in civil service law and pension issues over his entire career. Don currently serves on the New York State Comptroller's Pension Advisory Council. He frequently reviews and/or drafts state legislation seeking to improve the quality of work life for CSEA represented workers. He's also a graduate of the 2005 Harvard Trade Union program at Harvard University. With all of that said, I will turn it over to your presenter today, Don Kelly.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I don't know when you're going to be viewing this, but the beauty of a webinar that is recorded is the fact that you can view this at any time. Unfortunately, the topic that I'm going to talk about today is not a real happy topic, but it's an important topic that you need to know about in order for you to know whether you have rights to your position during a reduction in force, otherwise known as a layoff. Today, we are going to be talking about statutory protections. What laws cover the layoff process? In New York State, we have the Civil Service Law, Section 80, as well as the Civil Service Rules and Regulations. We're going to talk about who has layoff rights and conversely, who does not have layoff rights. We're going to be talking about layoff units. Very important to understand what your layoff unit is. When there's layoffs, it is true that the layoffs are done by seniority. However, it's not the entire state, and it's not the entire department in many cases for state employees. It is, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further into the presentation. Seniority for layoffs. What is the seniority for layoffs during a reduction in force? What defines your seniority and how it's affected? How is it, it could be increased or it could be negatively affected by certain appointment types. The layoff process itself, we're going to be talking about horizontal reassignment, vertical displacement, and/or retreat. What happens after you're laid off or you go down and you bump someone in a lower salary graded position? You have rights to your previous position, and as such, your name is going to be added to a preferred list. We're going to be talking about the agency reduction transfer list program. And finally, we'll provide you with a number of resources. But right away, I want to tell you that CSEA website, which is CSEANY.org. If you get onto that website, and you must log in with your username and password, then go to the first page there's tabs at the top of the page. You go to members. You hover your mouse or your cursor over members. A drop-down box will appear. Move your cursor down to resources, and another box will appear to the right. Move your cursor over to layoff services. That will bring you to the section of our website that provides layoff services. You click on state employees, and you are now able to go through a interactive computer program that will allow you to walk through this program that I'm about to explain. So, okay, we've been hearing a lot about layoffs lately, but what do members need to know about layoffs? Number one, layoffs are decided on by management. Management, by law, has the right to determine the number of personnel, the number of positions, the titles that work for their agencies. We, as CSEA represented employees, have certain rights under civil service law and the rules and regulations that protect us. The longer we work on a permanent basis, the more rights we have. We don't have the right as a union to force management not to reduce the workforce. We have a, okay, let's get right into the terminology. Layoff terminology, you need to know the layoff terms in order for you to understand the process. And there are many terms. Some of the terms have double or triple meanings when you compare the terms to what you might know about in the contract. Seniority, for instance, has several different definitions. So the first thing you need to know is what your official civil service title is. Your official civil service title is the title that civil service has on your record. It may be different than the title that you call yourself in the office. For instance, you may say you're a typist or a clerk, and the clerk or typist title has changed over the years. The current title is office assistant, and if you're a typist, it's office assistant parenthesis keyboard specialist. So you need to know what your official civil service title is, because all rights regarding layoffs happen within certain titles and title series if you're in a promotional series. If you're in a promotional line, you need to know that the higher up you are in that promotional line, it means that should you be displaced from your current title, you may have the opportunity to bump down into a lower level title that is in direct line of promotion. I get questioned a lot about, can management confidential employees bump into CSEA bargaining unit positions? Or can a PS&T or PEF represented employee bump into a CSEA represented position? The answer is yes, if those positions are within a higher level promotional line, or if the person that's bumping into our bargaining unit is utilizing what's called a retreat. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. You can stop this video at any time and rewind or view it again if you miss one or more of the terms that I'm going to be talking about. Once you understand what your title is, you need to know whether your title is in a competitive jurisdictional classification, a non-competitive class, labor class, exempt class. Or if you're working in SUNY, if you're in an unclassified service title, you're probably covered by a different union. So a competitive class title is one where you take an examination, and once you've passed the examination, you're appointed off of the list, usually one of the top 3 willing to accept the position. That's a competitive class position. You serve probation, and you are, if you're permanent in the competitive class position, you have the most rights of any employees in the state who are in other jurisdiction classifications. For instance, non-competitive class, they're covered by Section 80-A of the Civil Service Law. They also have the right to displace. They do not have a promotional line in the non-competitive class. You could also be working in a labor class position. Labor class position, you get your layoff rights by contract, not by law, by contract. But what our contract says for both non-competitive and labor class is that you get the same procedures as if you were in the competitive class. An important point here is to know you cannot usually displace between jurisdictional classifications. The only exception to that is retreating. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Okay, what is a layoff unit? Depending on your agency, a layoff unit could be a statewide layoff unit for your agency, for your department, or there could be geographical layoff units within your department. And all bumping and retreating and horizontal reassignments happen within layoff units. And some agencies, although they have a statewide layoff unit by rule, the agency has a policy to prevent an employee from having to displace and go from, say, Buffalo to Long Island. They have a policy where they displace locally first, and then those people who are least senior, then they would be the ones that would have to displace to a different part of the state if need be. And I'll talk again a little bit more about that. Appointment type. What is your appointment type? Permanent employees have layoff rights. So if you're permanent in the position on the day of layoff, you have layoff rights. If you're temporary or provisional or per diem or hourly, unfortunately, you do not have layoff rights. And you must be laid off before any permanent employees are laid off. What is your seniority date? Now, we have seniority dates in the contract for purposes of overtime distribution, for work assignment locations, past day choices, vacation, personal leave. Those types of things are based on contractual seniority. Seniority for layoffs is your classified seniority, and it begins on the first day that you were hired on a permanent basis, and all permanent service and all service thereafter, as long as you're permanent on the date of layoff. Veteran status. If you have veteran status, if you were a veteran and have been discharged honorably or on honorable terms, you may be entitled to some extra seniority added to your current seniority date. If you have 10 years of normal classified service seniority and you are a disabled veteran, you actually have 5 more years of seniority. So you actually have 15 years of seniority. Your date of original appointment on a permanent basis is backdated 5 years. Agency reduction transfer list. That is a program that the state of New York instituted for its employees during periods of minimal layoffs, where if there's a closure of a facility, the names of those people who are affected are put on a preferred list, which is called an agency reduction transfer list, or ARTL, and they are given preference of hiring before the facility closes. So this offers transfer opportunities to individuals. There are various methods of displacement: horizontal reassignment, vertical displacement, or retreat. Once a person is laid off or placed in a lower level title, you have a right to go back to that title that you were laid off from, and your name is placed on a preferred list for up to 4 years. Then, as an additional way of getting back to your old job or a similar job, the state has a policy of using a reemployment roster, where your name is added to a reemployment roster, and the employer has the right to appoint from the reemployment roster before people are appointed from promotion lists or open competitive eligible lists. Okay, agency management is the one I mentioned before that decides which positions are to be abolished. Now, if they're going to be doing some closures of facilities, a position that might be abolished might be encumbered by a person who has much more seniority than someone else in the same title in that layoff unit. It doesn't matter whether the position is occupied by a person who has greater seniority, because once the position is slated to be abolished, the incumbent then can exercise their right to bump. Whether the current employee occupying the targeted position is to be laid off really depends on their relative seniority, as I explained. The people who we represent who have layoff rights are people who are permanently appointed. And in the competitive class, your rights are determined under Section 80 of the Civil Service Law, as well as the classified civil service rules. In 1972, there was an agreement between CSEA and the state of New York to establish the layoff units. Since then, that 1972 layoff agreement has become the rule. So a rule, once it's adopted by civil service, has the force and effect of civil service law. For non-competitive employees, you must look to Section 80-A of the Civil Service Law. That section of law provides your layoff rights, which are procedurally equal to the competitive class layoff rights. And again, labor class, we negotiated the layoff rights and the preferred list rights for labor class employees in the contract. If a person has a non-permanent appointment, which is provisional or temporary, those individuals in those positions must be laid off first before any permanently appointed employee is laid off. If that person who's provisional or temporary has a hold item, then the individual is allowed to go back to their hold item and either simply be placed in that hold item, or if there's someone occupying that position, they can, the person who is coming back can bump that other individual out. So provisional or temporary employees have no rights in their current position. However, they have the right to go back to any hold item they have. Okay. If you're in the competitive class or the non-competitive class or the labor class and you're on probation, you have minimal rights. However, you must be laid off before any permanent employee who is not on probation. Okay. So permanent employees, when you are appointed permanently, especially in a promotion, typically you are on a leave of absence from your former position. Or if you're serving provisionally or temporarily in another position and you have a permanent position that you have a hold on, then you can go back to that hold item if you have it. Permanent employees on probation have been granted a leave of absence while on probation. You have no right to horizontally or vertically displace in the probationary title that you're holding. However, you do have the right to go back to your hold item if you have one. There's certain individuals who do not have layoff rights. They include temporary employees with no hold item, provisional employees who have no hold item, seasonal employees, per diem employees, or hourly employees. We talked a little bit about the layoff units. Layoff units exist for competitive, non-competitive, and labor class. In 1972, there was a layoff agreement, which now has morphed into Civil Service Law Section 72. Some agencies have statewide layoff units, like DOCS, Department of Correctional Services and Correctional and Community Services. They have a special policy where if there's a layoff in one of their prisons, the layoff, the bumping and retreating and horizontal displacement happen within the facility first. Then the least senior person who has no one to bump or displace, then they are compared to other employees in the same title in the same county if there are multiple facilities within the same county. And then the least senior people in DOCS in the let me say again, some agencies have statewide layoff units, and if DOCS, you are laid off in your county, then you have the right to displace statewide. Some agencies are geographically divided, such as OMH and OPWDD. OMH and OPWDD have a combined layoff unit. And the combined layoff unit, if you have a facility in OMH or OPWDD where you have the same title, you can displace between those agencies. That's the only example of the ability to displace between the same agencies. And those facilities are grouped geographically. So when you are given a opportunity to choose where you would like to accept employment in the layoffs, then you can choose within a geographic location. Seniority for layoffs in the competitive class is defined by Section 80. Again, if you're on probation, you have less seniority than you do if you're off of probation. Non-competitive class, you have to look at Section 80-A. Labor class is Article 20 of our contract. And seniority is defined in civil service law as the date of original appointment on a permanent basis in the classified service and all continuous service since that date. Temporary or provisional service prior to a permanent appointment does not count for seniority purposes. Between two or more permanent appointments, if you're temporary or provisional, between two permanent appointments, that time does count. The important thing to know is when you were hired on a permanent basis originally, and what is the position that you hold on a permanent basis on the day of layoff. All that service counts. I'll give you an example. Suppose you were hired 20 years ago on a permanent basis, and you served for 10 years, and then you were provisional for 5 years because they hadn't held the exam. So you were provisional for 5 years. And then you took the test and you were appointed off the list, and you become permanent and you're now off probation. So you have a total of 16 years. The original 10, 5 years as provisional, and then the 1 year that you serve on your probation. So now you've got 16 years of total service. All that time counts. Okay. Adjustments to seniority dates. If you're legally blind, you have absolute preference, which means you have super seniority. Everyone in your layoff unit would have to be laid off before you were laid off. Veterans credits. Veterans are given credit for their military service, and I'll explain in just a couple of minutes what extra credit you receive. But that is covered under Section 85.7 of the Civil Service Law. And I'll tell you right now what your veterans credits are. If you're a disabled veteran, you have a 10% military-related disability as determined by the VA. You will receive 60 months or 5 years of extra service credit added to your seniority date. So if you are 20-year, you've been permanent for 20 years, and you're a disabled veteran, then you actually have 25 years of seniority. Your date of original appointment on a permanent basis is backdated 5 years. If you're a non-disabled veteran, you receive half of the disabled veterans credit. You receive 30 months of service credit, or 2.5 years. A spouse of a 100% disabled veteran receives the 5 years or 60 months of additional service credit. In order to qualify as a spouse of a 100% disabled vet, 100% disabled vet has to be determined, it has to be a military-related disability as determined by the Veterans Administration, and the spouse has to live with the disabled veteran in the same home and be the head of household for that house. Veterans and exempt volunteer firefighters in the non-competitive and labor class who do not have protection, which would be those who have less than 1 year of service. The first year of service for non-competitive class individuals or labor class individuals, you do not have layoff rights under the law. Section 86 provides that you have a 1 year to request to be transferred to a different position in the state of New York. During a period of major layoffs, this section of law is rarely used because there are too many positions being abolished and there's not enough vacancies for you to transfer into. In order to be eligible as a veteran, you need to have served in one of these conflicts or wars. Notice that Lebanon, Grenada, and Panama, if you served in those theaters of operation, you need to have an expeditionary medal for the armed forces, the Navy, or Marine Corps. And that's provided under Section 85. If you serve during Persian Gulf or during the War on Terrorism, which is the current state of affairs, once you are discharged, and you must tell civil service that you have military service, then you will be able to qualify for the extra service credit. Again, disabled veterans must have served during a time of war. Must be certified by the Veterans Administration as eligible for a service-related disability payment. You must have a disability of at least 10%, and the disability status has to be established on or before the date of layoff. Seniority for everyone else includes any time that you're on an approved leave of absence. If you're on an approved leave of absence with or without pay, and you come back, and on the date of layoff you're permanent again, then all that time that you were out on approved leave of absence counts towards your seniority. It does not break your service for seniority. Temporary or provisional service between two permanent appointments, I explained that earlier. That service does count as long as you are permanent on the date of layoff. Time spent on workers' compensation, or if you're terminated under workers' comp followed by a reinstatement, all that time counts toward your seniority for layoff purposes. Time on the preferred list. If you are laid off and unemployed and you are not employed by the state for a period of up to 4 years, that time, and if suppose you are hired back during that 4-year period, all that time that you were out on the preferred list counts for future seniority. Breaks in service in the competitive class under Section 80.3, non-competitive class 88.3, and labor class, the contract requires the same as 80.3 of the Civil Service Law. Basically, a break in service under these sections say that if you resign from your position and are hired back within 3 years, your date of original appointment remains the same. It remains unbroken. Now, breaks in service for contract benefits, you have to look at your contract because for purposes of overtime distribution, shift and pass day, work location, vacations, and things like that. Seniority is defined in Section 44 of the contract, and it may be different than seniority for layoffs. Now, your seniority date is negatively affected as well, and in this case, after 4 years, if you have not been rehired, and 4 years pass from the time that the date of layoff occurs, your name is removed from the preferred list because the preferred list goes away. You're considered to be a new hire when you are reinstated. Temporary or provisional service before your first permanent appointment, unfortunately, does not count. Okay, it's the date of original appointment on a permanent basis and all service after that date. That's what's important. If you have a break of service of more than 3 years, if you come back within 3 years, you get your old seniority date back. If you're out for longer than 3 years and are reinstated, then you start with what happens is, if you're out, depending on how long you're out beyond 3 years, your original date will be adjusted. So if you resign and you're out for 4 years, your original date of seniority will be brought forward by 1 year. Okay, so it's adjusted by how long you were not working for the state beyond 3 years. Okay, the layoff process. Now that we know the terminology, you know what your title is, whether it's in the competitive class, you know what your seniority date is, you know what your layoff unit is. Those are essential elements in order for you to understand the layoff process. The layoff process is based on seniority, and I'll explain how it's applied right now. There are 3 types of bumping and retreating. There's horizontal reassignment, which is from one title to an exact title, bumping someone who has less seniority than you do. If no horizontal reassignment opportunities are available to you, the next level is vertical displacement. This only occurs in the competitive class because the competitive class is the only jurisdictional classification that has a promotional line. A vertical displacement means you go from a higher level title within direct line of promotion down to the next lower level occupied title that is in direct line of promotion. Retreat. If both horizontal reassignment and vertical displacement is not available to you, your only other option will be a retreat, where you go back to the position that you held immediately prior to your current position. And that position is not in your direct line of promotion. Say you took a promotion exam and you promoted from a different line, a different title series. You can retreat back to that former title series if you're not able to horizontally reassign or vertically displace. In the layoff process, an item is targeted for abolition. The incumbent or the occupant, if they have retention rights, if they're permanent and they have the ability to displace someone because this person has greater seniority, the retention rights are determined by seniority. Number one, permanent employees who are off probation have the greatest retention rights, have the greatest layoff rights. This includes contingent permanent employees. Second, employees who are on probation, while they have certain rights, especially if they have a hold item, they can go back to their hold item. But if they're in a probationary position, they have less rights than someone who is not on probation. Again, including contingent permanent employees who are on probation. Probationers must return to their hold items if they have a hold item. They cannot vertically bump or retreat. Okay. Non-permanent employees have no rights at all, and they must be laid off before people who are permanent, whether they're on probation or not. You must know your layoff unit, you must know your title, and know that parenthesis means something. If you're holding a title that is an office assistant 1 and you have 20 years of seniority and you have a coworker who is a office assistant 1 Spanish speaking with 5 years of seniority, you cannot displace that person because the parenthesis, which contains Spanish speaking, that separates that title from the generic title of Office Assistant 1. Even though you may have been appointed off the same eligible list, it depends on what your title is. That's why it's important that you know what your title is and you know that you know your seniority. Parenthesis could include such things as keyboarding, office and mail, Spanish speaking. There's several different types of parenthetics or parentheses. You know your jurisdictional classification. If you're competitive, you can only displace competitive class. If you promoted in from the non-competitive class under the retreat, you may be able to retreat back to the non-competitive class title. But under normal circumstances, if you're appointed from you're appointed to a competitive class title, you cannot normally displace outside of the competitive class. I'll give you an example in a minute. Classified seniority, your retention rights. What is your date of original appointment on a permanent basis in the classified service? And what, if you have veterans credits, have you taken advantage of those? Okay, let's talk about horizontal reassignment. Let's get right into the meat of the matter here. Horizontal reassignment is exact title to exact title in New York State service in your layoff unit. Suppose you're in a layoff unit, say the Department of Health. The Department of Health is a statewide layoff unit. If you are an Office Assistant 2, you would be able to displace an Office Assistant 2 who has less seniority than you do within your same layoff unit. So in this example, an Office Assistant 2 with 20 years of seniority in the Department of Health, can that individual displace an Office Assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority in the Department of Health? Things to check for are the titles. Titles are exact. Office Assistant 2. Notice no parenthesis after them. So a 20-year Office Assistant 2 can displace a 10-year 10-year Office Assistant 2 in the same layoff unit, which is the Department of Health. That's a real easy example. Here's another example. Office Assistant 2 with 20 years in the Department of Health. And we have an office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority, but this office assistant 2 works in OCFS. Can the office assistant 2 in the Department of Health bump the office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority in OCFS? The answer is no. Reason why is because the office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority is in a different layoff unit. Its exact title, and the 20-year employee has greater seniority than the 10-year employee. However, because they're in separate layoff units, the Department of Health employee cannot displace the less senior office assistant 2 in OCFS. Think of a building with many rooms. Each room is a separate layoff unit. All bumping and retreating and horizontal displacement happen within each room. You cannot bump outside of that room. Here's a third example. We have an office assistant 2, Department of Health, with 20 years of seniority. Now we also have an office assistant 2, keyboarding, in parenthesis, with 10 years of seniority in the Department of Health. Can the 20-year office assistant 2 displace the office assistant 2 keyboarding? The answer is no. The reason why is because of the parenthetic, is because of the parenthesis. The titles are not exact. The layoff units are exact. The office assistant 2 has 20 years seniority as opposed to the 10-year office assistant 2 keyboarding employee. However, because the titles are different, you cannot bump a person with a different title. Let's talk about vertical displacement. If horizontal displacement wasn't available to you, this is the next possible option. In order to vertically displace, you must be permanently appointed to the title, which is above the entry level in a promotional line. You must not have the ability to displace another employee via horizontal reassignment, title for title. So you're the least senior person in your title, in your layoff unit. Then the position in the next lower level title has to be in the same layoff unit. And it's got to be in direct line of promotion. A lower graded position must be occupied by a person who has less retention standing. Now, if this happens, if you vertically displace, your salary is going to be reduced. Your salary, typically what will happen is you will go to the same step in the lower level title that you were at the higher level title. If this happens to you, your name will be placed on a preferred list for the title that you were laid off from. So for 4 years, your name will be on that preferred list, and you will be offered opportunities to go back to your higher level title. Direct line of promotion. What is a direct line of promotion? Direct line of promotion is a title series that has the same generic root title. For example, office assistant in the stores and mail title series, we have 3 levels here. We have an office assistant 1, stores and mail. That's the entry level of the title series. Next, we have office assistant 2, stores and mail. That's the second level. And then finally, stores and mail Operations supervisor is the third level. Another example would be developmental assistant 1, developmental assistant 2, and developmental assistant 3. That is a promotional series. That is where vertical displacement occurs. We could have other office assistant titles, say the generic office assistant 1, 2, 3. Office assistant is the generic root in that title series. So here we go. Let's take a look at vertical displacement. Again, assuming that you could not displace someone in the same title in your layoff unit because you're least senior. Now your position is, in this example, you are an office assistant 3. You work in DOT Region 1. You have 20 years of classified seniority. Your position is abolished. You can't bump another office assistant 3 because they have greater seniority than you. But there's an office assistant 2 in Region 1 and an office assistant 1 in Region 1. Can you displace down to the office assistant 2 level? You have 20 years of seniority. The person in the office assistant 2 position in your layoff unit has 10 years of seniority. Can you displace? And the answer is yes. You can displace. It's the next lower level title that is occupied in your layoff unit with a person who has less seniority than you. Now, in DOT, you have several regions. Depending on the layoff units for Department of Transportation, if each region were a separate layoff unit, you would be restricted to Region 1. But I believe DOT has multiple layoff units. So you would be able to displace to other work locations. Okay, it doesn't matter about the work location. What matters is what is your layoff unit. So in this example, the office assistant 3 can displace an office assistant 2 within DOT because the office assistant 2 has 10 years of seniority. Now, we have an office assistant 2 in DOT Region 1, which is we're carrying forward the previous example. Can that office assistant 2 in Region 1 with 10 years of seniority displace the office assistant 1 in DOT Region 1 with 5 years of seniority? The answer again is yes. It's the same promotional line. It's the same layoff unit. And the office assistant 2 has greater seniority than office assistant 1. Now, some questions come in. What happens if a person they both have the same number of years of seniority, and then they're in the same title? Well, if they were appointed from the same eligible list, the rule of thumb is whoever receives a higher score on the eligible list gets greater retention standing, even though if you're hired on the same day off the same eligible list, you still have the same, you have the same seniority date. But if you're in a competitive class position, the score on your examination is what they use. Now, if your scores were the same, then the rule is any reasonable and consistent method of breaking ties. So they could throw dice, they could pick a name out of a hat, as long as the method is reasonable and consistent. The civil service law allows that. Okay. Now, suppose the office assistant 2 has 10 years, But the office assistant 1 in this layoff unit has 15 years. Can the office assistant 2 with 10 years displace the person who has 15 years in the office assistant 1? The answer is no. And why? Because in order to vertically displace, the person who is displacing the office assistant 2 has to have greater seniority than the office assistant 1. It's not just simply because it's a lower level title, but the person who occupies the position in the lower level title has to have less seniority in order for a vertical displacement to occur. Here's an example of an office assistant 3 in OMH OPWDD in layoff unit A. It's the same layoff unit, okay, with 20 years of seniority. Again, at level 2, we have an office assistant 2, Spanish speaking, same layoff unit, who has 10 years of seniority. Can the office assistant 3 displace the office assistant 2, Spanish speaking? Again, the answer is no, because of the parenthesis, because of the parenthetics. Now, if there was no parenthetic, if there was no Spanish speaking position at the level, the second level, and the office assistant 2 had 10 years of seniority, then the answer would be yes, they could displace. But because the office assistant 2 Spanish speaking, that's not part of the promotional line of an office assistant. Okay, so the 20-year seniority employee of the office assistant 3 would not be able to displace the office assistant 2 Spanish speaking. So they would have to go all the way down to the entry-level position and displace the office assistant 1, who is in the same layoff unit. If there is no second-level position within the same promotional series, then the higher level title individual would be able to displace down to the entry level. Okay, another example of vertical displacement. Suppose we have a stores and mail operations supervisor, and we have office assistant 2, stores and mail, and office assistant 1, stores and mail. That's the promotional line. But in this example, there are no positions. But if there were a position, all the positions are vacant. So there's no one to bump in the office assistant to stores and mail title. The position of stores and mail operations supervisor, that position is going to be abolished. That person encumbering that position does not have the ability to displace anyone because they're the least senior in that title. Would they be able to bump into a vacancy? Or if there's no position, there would be no place to bump. But if there was a vacancy, would they be able to bump into it? The answer is no. You cannot bump into a vacancy. You would have to displace down again to the entry level position. Okay, so even though there could be a vacant item in the office assistant 2 within the layoff unit, you cannot bump into that. Now the employer, if OMH OPWDD, in this case Parks and Rec, if they wish to fill that vacancy before the layoff, they could do that. But during a layoff process, you cannot bump into a vacancy. Okay, so we've talked about horizontal reassignment. We've talked about vertical displacement. This is the last opportunity to remain employed if you are the least senior and you can't displace someone horizontally and you have no vertical displacement opportunities because there's no positions for you to be able to bump into. A retreat occurs when and only when there are no lower level occupied positions in direct line of promotion at any level in a promotional series. The criteria here is you must be permanently appointed to the higher level. You must not have the ability to displace another employee either horizontally, title for title, or in the direct line of displacement. You must have served in the lower graded title that is not in the direct line of promotion. Remember, you're in a higher level position within direct line of promotion, but there's no positions beneath you that are filled, or there are no positions at all. And you served in a position that is not in that direct line of promotion, but you took a promotional exam and were appointed off the eligible list and came in at the higher level title. You, under the retreat, you can retreat back to the title that you held immediately prior to the last permanent appointment. And that title has to be in a lower salary graded position. And again, that position must be occupied by a person who has less retention standing than you. Here's an example. We've got a promotional series of Office Assistant 1, Stores and Mail. So we've got the Office Assistant 1, Stores and Mail. We have Office Assistant 2, Stores and Mail. We have Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor. Notice there are no lower level positions that are filled in the Office Assistant 2, Stores and Mail, or the Office Assistant 1, Stores and Mail. The Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor position for this example is going to be abolished. The incumbent has 20 years of seniority. Now, immediately before becoming a Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor, that individual was an Office Assistant 2 keyboarding. Now, they took the promotional exam, they passed it, they were reachable, and they were appointed to the Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor. So the OA2 keyboarding was the last permanent position they held immediately prior to their current position. The OA2 keyboarding position in the same layoff unit is being held by a 12-year senior individual. The last position held before promoting to the Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor. So, because this 20-year Stores Mail Operations Supervisor has no one to bump down in direct line of promotion, can they go back to their OA2 keyboarding position? The answer is yes. The reason why is because it is the last position that the Stores and Mail Operations Supervisor held immediately before becoming the supervisor. The position is, there is a position in the layoff unit that is occupied by a person who has 12 years of seniority. So the answer is yes, the 20-year employee can displace the 12-year employee under this example. Now, the 12-year employee here, the OA2, if they were appointed permanently, they would be laid off and perhaps go to an OA1 keyboarding or have their names placed on a preferred list for the OA2 keyboarding. Here's a second example for retreat. We have an office assistant 2 with 20 years of seniority. We have an office assistant 1 position, but that position is vacant. Or in docs, there is no position in this layoff unit. Can the office assistant 2 with 20 years of seniority displace the office assistant 1 stores mail if that individual had 10 years of seniority? The answer is yes, because the OA1 stores mail was the last position that the office assistant 2 held immediately before becoming an office assistant 2. The lower level title, even though it has a parenthesis, the fact here is that it was the last position that this person held before promoting to the office assistant 2. So a retreat is possible, provided that the office assistant 1 level of stores and mail is occupied with a person who has less seniority. And in this example, the office assistant 1 stores mail has 10 years of seniority as opposed to 20. Let's look at the third example. We have an office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority in docs. We have an office assistant 1 position that's filled with a person with 12 years of seniority in the same layoff unit. Now, the position that the office assistant 2 held immediately before becoming an office assistant 2 was an office assistant 1 stores and mail. This person took a promotion exam, was appointed off the list, and is now an office assistant 2. The office assistant 1 stores mail is in the same layoff unit and is occupied by a person who has 5 years of seniority. Now, the office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority would normally be able to displace an office assistant 1, but in this situation, the office assistant 1 has 12 years of seniority. So as we said before, you cannot vertically displace if the lower level position is occupied by a person who has greater seniority. So that's blocked. You cannot vertically displace. If you are blocked because you cannot vertically displace, can you then retreat? As we explained before, if there was no position lower than you in direct line of promotion, or if the position was there but it was vacant, that would give you the opportunity to retreat back to the title you held previously. In this example, this office assistant 2 is blocked and cannot displace to an office assistant 1. So therefore, the retreat is also blocked. I know this is confusing, but this is how the system works. Let's look at this example. We have an OA2, 10 years of seniority in docs. We have an office assistant 1 where there's no vacancy, or there is a vacancy, or there's no positions. Under those circumstances, you cannot bump into a vacancy. However, there's no one there to block the office assistant 2. Now, in this situation, where this person came from was Department of Motor Vehicles. If the OA1 stores and mail was the previous title that was held. Can the office assistant 2 with 10 years of seniority displace the office assistant 1 stores mail with 5 years of seniority? It's the last title they held immediately before promoting. However, it was in a different agency, a different layoff unit. The answer is no. The only time that you can retreat is if the title that you held immediately on a permanent basis, immediately before the title you hold now, is in the same layoff unit. Agency reduction transfer list program is only available to New York State employees. It's a mandatory list before a date of layoff, and that list contains the names of employees who are occupying impacted titles that are due to be terminated or due to be eliminated at impacted locations. Many times when a facility is closing, many of the positions are going to be abolished. So the incumbents in those positions, their names get put on an agency reduction transfer list. That list is then used to fill vacancies in other departments and other agencies. This is not a layoff list. This is a list, a transfer list. So, and all of this happens before the date of layoff, before the date of the closure. Once the closure occurs, the agency reduction list goes away. And then we go through a layoff scenario. If you are laid off, or if you bumped down to a lower level title or retreated back to a lower level title, your name is placed on a preferred list from the title that you were laid off in, both in your layoff unit as well as a general preferred list for the general state purposes. Methods of reemployment: preferred list, reemployment roster, promotion eligible list, and open competitive eligible list. This is the order in which positions are filled after a layoff. They have to go to the preferred list first, and they have to go to the agency preferred list first, then the statewide preferred list, then a reemployment roster, then a promotional eligible list if there is one, and finally open competitive eligible list if there is one. And then even after the open competitive eligible list, if there is if there's a need to have provisional appointments or temporary appointments, those can only occur if there is no other list available. Preferred list is a mandatory list established as of the date of layoff, containing the names of laid off employees. Those employees are ranked by layoff unit and according to their seniority for reinstatement to their layoff title and direct line of lower level titles and or appropriate titles. Preferred list. Names remain active for 4 years on the preferred list from the date of layoff. Names are arranged in order of seniority, from the most senior to the least senior. When the employer is going to fill positions, they use the rule of one. They have to go to the top name on the list, and they send out a request as to whether the individual is willing to accept the appointment. They may even ask a person to go on an interview, but the employer is required to hire the first person on the eligible list. So it's very, very important that your name remains active on the eligible list. The time to respond to appointment offers, usually on a telephone, if they give you a call, it's 2 business days. If they give you a written notice, they send you an email, it should be noted in the notice, in the offer, how long you have to respond. There is a significant impact for refusal to accept an offer. If you refuse to accept an offer of a job at your former grade level in the county that you were laid off from, your name will be removed from the from the preferred list, and you will not be offered another job. So it's very, very important that you reply to these job offers, even if you're not interested. Please apply, say yes, you'd be willing to consider the position, and then make your final decision before the first day of work. Even if you're offered a job interview, go to the interview. Do not reject the offer unless you have substantial and significant reasons. If you are laid off and unemployed and you refuse a job offer, your unemployment insurance could also be negatively affected. The order of certification from preferred lists. First, when there's a vacancy after a layoff, first, the Department of Layoff is where the preferred list, they use that list first. So if you're laid off in the Department of Health, the Department of Health will have its own preferred list. If they run out of names, if they have a vacancy, and they don't have a preferred list for that layoff unit, then they go to the statewide layoff, the statewide preferred list, which includes the names of people who are laid off from all other departments, ranked by seniority. Again, the preferred lists, if you were to look at a preferred list, you would see the names ranked from the most senior to the least senior, based on the date you were originally hired on a permanent basis. They're certified first, title for title. Then, if the preferred list runs out of names, and if this title was in a direct line of promotion, then anybody at a higher level who was laid off from a higher graded title in that direct line of promotion, they would also be offered the vacancy. And then finally, employees laid off from similar titles, which is called the reemployment roster. That's the order of preference when appointing off the preferred list. Reemployment roster is slightly different than a preferred list. Preferred list, remember I said it's a rule of 1, where they have to take the top person on the list. Reemployment roster is still a mandatory list. It's established as of the date of layoff. It contains the names of laid off employees, not necessarily in any particular title, but any title that's similar to the title that is where there's a vacancy to be filled. For appointments to titles other than those for which they are eligible for reinstatement from a preferred list. What that means is if you're on a eligible list from an office assistant keyboarding, you're on a preferred list for that, you can be hired as an office assistant non-keyboarding off of a reemployment roster. And sometimes the list there is expanded to include other titles that are in your occupational field as determined by the Civil Service Department. So the whole idea here is to get people back to work, whether it's in their original title or some other title. The fact is they want to get people back to work, and they want to get people back to work at the grade level that they were laid off from. Names are certified in random order without regard to seniority status as a probationer or a layoff unit. Under the reemployment roster, it's a rule of list. It really doesn't matter what your seniority is. The reemployment roster is although it's a mandatory list of people who have been laid off, it's a general list that the employer can select anybody from that list. So again, to summarize, you need to know what your civil service title is. You need to know what the jurisdictional classification is. You need to know what your appointment type is. Are you permanent? If you're permanent, you have more rights than someone who's not permanent. You need to know your layoff unit. You need to know your classified seniority date. And then you need to know, if you're a veteran, whether you've identified yourself as a veteran with the Civil Service Department. Please do not wait until the layoffs occur before telling folks that you are a veteran, because you cannot get the extra service credit unless you notify civil service and tell them that you are a veteran. Members, please make sure you can be found. If you have a change of phone number, if you have a change of email address or mailing address, some people, they changed their names because of a marriage or divorce or for other reasons. You need to make sure that civil service has your information up to date and accurate. If you have questions, you can call the Career Mobility Office, the CMO for short. It's also online, or you can look at or give them a call on the telephone or contact them at their email address, which is shown. The New York State Retirement System, you need to contact them again with any name change. This has nothing to do with layoffs, but in order for you to make sure that they can find you, make sure your name and contact information is up to date and accurate. Here are some resources that will help you during the layoff process. Remember, the CSEANY.org website. You go to the Members tab, then select Resources, then Layoff Services. There you will have access to the booklet that the New York State uses, that all the agencies use, on information for employees who are affected by a layoff. I strongly urge you to look at these manuals, get online, check the Civil Service website, check the Civil Service website also has examinations, announcements. If you are laid off and you still have the ability to take examinations, you still have the ability to take promotional examinations. Your ability to take examinations are not affected negatively by the fact that you're on a preferred list. For CSEA members, in order to continue your CSEA member insurances, you need to apply for a dues-free membership, which goes for 1 year. During that year, you don't have to pay dues, but you're still a member, it still allows you to participate in our life insurance, in our other types of insurances that are only offered to members. And with that, I wanted to say thank you. I know this has been a lot of information, somewhat confusing, but if you have questions, please reach out to your local officer or your labor relations specialist. And of course, we are available for discussion at the CSEA headquarters if you have some specific questions regarding your layoff situation. So with that, I will say thank you. I wish you all well. Hopefully we'll prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So take care again. My name is Don Kelly. I'm the Director of Research, and I wish you a good day.
All right, thank you for today's session, reduction in force, layoff info for New York State Executive Branch employees. Please look for additional webinars of similar content in the very near future. Have a great rest of the day.